And we're back. Okay. A little behind today, so apologies for that. There's some yard work going on behind me, so it was kind of all the work they were doing was so loud that I didn't know. It was very distracting. I couldn't get on my normal schedule as quickly today as I had been doing. So, okay, we are going to talk about why we will exit a reality. And we're going to talk about what kind of starts to push us out of the human realities as a whole. Because I really want to kind of dive into that more, because a lot of the collectives are starting to exit out. Either they're exiting out altogether or they're exiting out of one at a time. Now, from my experience, I exited out one at a time. I did not completely exit out of all of them at the same time. But you do hear stories about people who have kind of done that, where they'll call it like this mass awakening and they just completely got to leave everything behind. In my case, and for what I see in a lot of people, it tends to be more, we leave it little by little, and there's some we leave quicker than others, and there are some that fall away and we don't really have to actually exit them. They just exit on their own. But there's so much resistance for us to leave them behind. And that's really what keeps us in them. A lot of them hold a lot longer than they should hold because we do not want to let them go. We do not want to have to walk away from them. That is not something we want to have to do. So we kind of try to play it the human way, that eventually, it might just fall away on its own. Eventually people will get the hint and go away. And we have some realities we'll kind of play that card with for a while and see what happens. And there'll be some of the universe will tell you just to let it go, walk away. You can't fix it. And when I say fix it, you can't align it. It's not soul aligned, it's not going to be. And, there's sort of this secret that really none of them that we created are soul aligned. When we created them from our human consciousness, there's nothing that is. It's all distorted. It's all meshed together, and it doesn't really serve our soul in that sense. It served a human reason, and that's why we had it. No matter how self-sacrificing or how much we thought we were really doing something for someone else, we were not doing it for anybody else. So we definitely go through a lot of realities where we think we're in it for one reason and we're really in it for the other. So we really get honest with ourselves about why we're there. In the beginning, there's just going to be a couple things that really start to stand out at you. They just really are very loud, and the realities get very, very loud. And it isn't, like I said, from my experience, and you might see other people say, no, they just left everything and left. But in my experience, you don't know enough to do that. You don't realize the level of distortion in everything you created to leave it all behind. I didn't have any idea how deep it was, how everything was so distorted. You feel like and sometimes for a while you keep certain things around and you get the misconception that, it must be aligned. Now, technically it's aligned to something. It never actually means it's highest aligned. It just means it's aligned to something. It's aligned to something that I am going through right now. We have a lot of realities that were human consciousness aligned, and that's why we were in them. That's how the human realities get created, because they're aligned with those beliefs. They're aligned with that value set in a sense. So they're still aligned. They're just not aligned to our highest soul aspects. They're not aligned to our galactic aspects. They're not aligned to the highest versions of ourselves. They're not aligned to those things. They're aligned to our human things. So you'll see a lot of people going through realities and you'll be like, how is that aligned? How is that aligned? It's so distorted. Well, it's aligned for their human consciousness that's aligned. There's a reason they're going to go through that rough and tough reality. Even if right now it looks fine. You can see down the road how it might trickle off. You can see how deep they keep digging deeper in, because they're not quite ready to see that, hey, this isn't really working. So the more we go through these things, the more we get more wisdom, in a sense, on how to create and how not to create, the better it is for us, right? The better it will be for us. But in the beginning, we don't we can't really see a lot of that. So a lot of things get kind of aligned for us in a sense that they just kind of go away. There are some you might see kind of get upgrades, but you won't probably notice them as upgrades because they won't be what your human would define as an upgrade. You know, you might get a reality where you have a certain job responsibilities, right? And to me, this always would occur in a linear year process, even though technically there's no space and time. There is a cadence to each linear year you have. You know, you have a linear year where you're going to go through your awakening. You're going to have a linear year where you're going to start your ascension. You're going to have linear years where certain things you're going to be focused on. Now, the linear years blur over. It's not like it starts January 1st and ends December 31st. You might start to have an inkling of this, and we talk about this quite a bit in the summer solstice. You know, you might see more stuff in around the Lion's Gate, and then you get to the equinoxes, and okay, now I'm starting to see my year shaping up. I'm still dealing with this year's stuff, this year's template, but I can still see next year's template I start to see the things I want to be doing. Now I'm going to get into October. Now I'm going to get into, you know, eclipse season. You start to see things start to exit out. You start to see other things start to come in. Even if you haven't actually started anchoring in any of those realities yet, you might still see them. You know, you start to pick up on the energy, the shift. You know, there's a change going on. It's something a little different about the next year, something else you're going to focus on. And you might keep everything else you're still working on too. If you're doing multiple projects, you're just going to do all those things. You might really focus on one. Normally I would focus on one until I got pretty good at it, and then I would get it, and then it would that one would kind of go to the back burner for a while, and then I focus on something else. Like for my this last 2023 for me was more about family, blood family, ancestral karma, working through a lot of those relationships for me that had been a little misaligned in the past, and there were certain things I had to work through there. So a lot of my other kind of quote, what someone would look at as, you know, actual product work, kind of got the back burner last year. You know, I wasn't focusing on that. I was focusing on learning to, you know, can you change up the roles? Are you going to be the same person going into the same realities? You know, sharing spaces with people. These all might feel like, well, because our human's going to define something as, if it's a reality, it's a focus, it's what you're doing if you're kind of making money doing it, right? It doesn't really focus on all the other subtle things that happen during the year that are pushing you toward the next thing, that are pushing you to get out of here, to get out of this reality, to move into this one. When we're in our human consciousness, we don't see the subtleties of any of that. We don't see it. I will guarantee you, if you go back now and look at certain years, you'll see where stuff started coming in a lot sooner. You know, you started to see the people that would have a bigger impact the next year. Even if that person didn't stay around, you'd see the impact of what they were bringing up. You know, that was going to stay around, and someone else might pick up the baton later on in the year, and you're still going to be working through the same stuff, even if that person didn't hold for the whole year. The theme was there, you know, and you could see you were finishing up one thing, starting another. We're always doing multiple kind of dimensions at one time, multiple consciousness. You're going to be receiving a consciousness and connecting with it, and then you're going to be doing a different consciousness in a sense of actually boots on the ground, making that reality happen, living from that consciousness, whatever that one you're doing that year, but still working on all the other ones too. So when we start getting into a lot of the depths, I mean, I see a lot of people doing videos on going deeper on stuff and really kind of getting to the nut of whatever it is that is the program, so people will just kind of getting to the bottom of it, what really is going on. A lot of them don't really tie in multidimensionality yet, so some stuff I'll look at it and listen, and I'm like, oh, I like a lot of the way they're saying that, but there's something missing, you know. And the higher you go, and the different things you go in consciousness, the different realities you start working through, the different aspects you start anchoring in, you start to kind of notice it's like it feels just not like the whole picture yet. Even though we know we don't have the whole picture yet either, there'll be little things that are kind of missing in that. You know, it doesn't touch on the multidimensionality of it. It doesn't try to touch on our multiple aspects. It's just trying to, let's just get this one human experience right, you know, by connecting with ourselves more. There's a big push for that right now. There's a big push for more interconnection to enhance the outer world and stop looking outside at everything. You see that that's very much mainstream now. You know, that is not something people are going to say, boy, that's a radical view. You know, everyone's going to see that and go, yeah, that's pretty much, you see that everywhere now. But the multidimensionality part, the different aspects, the tapping into your higher higher consciousness, more powerful states. A lot of that, some of it's touched on here and there, but a lot of it in that mainstream stuff, it's not really touched on because it doesn't have, you don't have as many people in those phases as you do in the other phases. You know, there's a certain amount of the collectives right now that are just really focusing on figuring out what's going on with them. And then you have a whole other section of the world, of the collectives, in a sense, of the population that they don't want anything to do with any of it. You know, they're still very much ingrained in the human realities because in some way or form, the human realities still work for them. They're not in a phase yet to say, no, I don't want to do that anymore. You know, no, for them, it still works. For them, it's still something there. For them, they still want to delve into it. They want to kind of double down, you know, double down the human realities. I can make it work. I can try to fix it. I'm gonna make this one go for once. So you just see so many different views of things. That's why when you do open yourself up to look at stuff and open yourself up to the concept of it. You know, one of the biggest things about achieving higher states of consciousness is just to be open to it. And the more I would reiterate that with people, it seemed like the simplest thing. I was watching something today about these two people. They do like a UFO show every Tuesday. And they just talk about all the stuff in the mainstream media about UFOs because it's kind of gotten a big heat up lately. And I've done videos on it, so I don't want to develop too much on that here. But it was funny because he went outside and filmed something and he thought, oh, that could be he doesn't really call them UFOs. And the new human term for that is what? Unidentified flying object. That's what they call them now. He said, oh, I saw this. I don't know what it was, but I saw this and it was really, really cool. So when we are looking at some of that stuff, and someone else made a comment to him, well, that's just because you wanted to see it. So now you're making that into that. It could have been a weather balloon, it could have been anything, but you're making it into this because you really wanted to see it. And my position on that is you saw it because you were open to seeing it. You see a lot more things when we're open to seeing it. We can communicate with different aspects of ourselves and we're open to doing it. If we're not open to doing it, then we're not able to do it. There's so much going on outside. I had no idea all this yard work was going to be. It's like a full-on, yeah, okay. Well, hopefully they don't mind being on camera. Okay, so when we talk about just being open and willing to see it, a lot of us aren't, and a lot of people would say, well, isn't everybody? You know, everyone's open and willing to see everything, but people don't want to see that. People aren't open and willing to touch on a lot of stuff. I would talk to a lot of people who had just lost someone and they would be, you know, so sad and in so much grief over that and really working through that and really wanting to be able to, you know, and the reason we feel that disconnect and that loss of them is because they were an aspect of us and we have not embodied in that aspect. So we see it as a loss. We see it as something that's not there anymore when it really was just a part of us that we never integrated in. Now, if we ask to bring that in, if we ask to talk to them again, you would be surprised what it opens up. But just saying it, intent is a lot of things. Energy is intent, right? That was one of the first things we learned, or we kind of get hit with when we get into any kind of energy work, or you get into any kind of working with energy, working with thoughts, you know, the whole manifesting thing, the whole secret. It is an intention there. It is a very shallow dig at it. But in the beginning, it feels like a very deep dig into it, right? Because we haven't done anything like that before. So just wanting to be able to see things, just wanting to be able to go to these depths, wanting to be able to go to these places. It's amazing what happens when we're willing to do that. It's amazing what happens when we are willing to say, yeah, I'm open to that. You know, bring that. A lot of people would say, bring it on. That was one of the ascension terms. A lot of people would say, just bring that on and let's see what happens. Well, it's like, don't say that unless you're really serious about it, because your universe will bring it on in a lot of different ways, and it might not like the way it comes in because it's going to be so different than what your human wants. A lot of times we still have, in the beginning, we still have this very distorted misconception of what ascension is, what higher consciousness realities are. What are they? You know, what does it exactly mean? What will I, you know, air quote, have in those realities? Where am I going to go with these things? You know, what's really going on when I get to these realities? And because they're not shaped like our human realities, we don't really know what we're going to expect. We kind of have one vision and it's not like that. So then we feel like it's kind of a letdown. right? Because it's not what I thought it was going to be. This is not what I thought I wanted to go do. I thought I was going to be, doing this, or I thought I was going to be doing this. Because we still have that human belief, the human consciousness on what makes it a success, what makes that reality work, what didn't make that reality work. So intention in the beginning is a lot of it. Intention in the beginning is you're kind of giving yourself permission to see more, to have the veils come down, people will utilize crystals, they got tarot cards, they got pendulums, they got, a zillion other things that they can utilize. But I will tell you, intention is probably the most powerful thing. If you say, hey, I'm open to this, then you'll be surprised how quickly you start to see. You start to see the connections in things. You start to see the synchronicities in things. You start to see you start to decode your reality on what is coming next. Even if you can't quite get it from your own consciousness, you're getting it kind of mirrored back from the outside of, okay, you can't keep this. This reality is pretty distorted. How do I know? How do I know when it's time to leave the reality behind? It's like if we've tried multiple times to align it, and we can't, because everyone in the reality has to want to align it. And there are some realities that are kind of one-way realities in a sense. They were set up for one thing. They're not multiplayer in a sense. We're not going to be able to plug a lot more people into this reality. It was one theme. There's no sequel here. There's just one track we're on, and that's it. And the track is, this was a reality where you were going to learn to stand up for yourself. And this won't be the only reality you have to do that in, but this was one of the realities where you were going to have to stand up for yourself. You're going to have to say, yeah, this is lopsided. A lot of mine in the beginning where they're just lopsided. Like, I'm doing all the effort, they're not really doing much. And when I've asked them to participate more in a sense of, whether it be in giving money to the reality, if I'm giving all the money and they're not giving anything else, and they could give the money to, or at least share the economic part of the reality, and that's not happening. Or I'm always the one kind of keeping the relationship going, or I'm the one that's doing this and doing that. You start to see the imbalances quite a bit, and to me, those are kind of the first ones to fall. And every time one of those would go, I get someone else would come in, and I would play out the reality again. But it might take a while yet for me to see, okay, this isn't really balanced either, because it was more balanced than the last one we had. It was an upgrade. It wasn't an upgrade. Now I would not look at it as an upgrade in that same sense, because now I have more vision to see through it. It's still kind of the same. It's a little bit of a tick up, but not as much. So we go a little bit slower in the beginning, but we feel like we're kind of going leaps and bounds, and a lot of things are coming at us because everything is not aligned. Everything is loud. Everything is disjointed, and for me, the biggest ones were these are not balanced relationships. None of these, whether it's romantic, whether it's friendship, whether it was, no matter what it was, they're not balanced, I'm doing everything and no one else is. Or you notice you were being there for everyone else, but when you needed someone to be there for you, they weren't there. You might ask them, hey, can you not do this anymore? I've asked you maybe 5 times before to not do whatever it is you thought was a disrespectful act, and it keeps getting done and done and done and done again and again and again and again. And then all of a sudden you're like, okay, that's it. I'm going to just, I'm going to leave. Now, a lot of times in those maybe the first 10 or 15 we go through, we might not have the communication skills yet to have an open, honest discussion from our soul and from our higher aspects and say, hey, this isn't working and this is why. We just might exit out. We don't want to have that talk. I don't want to have this discussion. And what I also found a lot of time was if I stopped participating, they didn't care to have a discussion either. The reality just went away. They were kind of one-track realities in a sense. They weren't here to be to be realigned. They weren't here to be constructed differently. They weren't here to be aligned in a different way. They were a one-stop shop. They had one purpose, and once that purpose was fulfilled, and I was like, yeah, I'm not participating in this anymore, there was no reason for the reality to continue, so it goes away. And that's where we can feel a lot of confusion and loss because, well, I want it to be this. I want this reality to turn into this conscious partnership, and everyone's working together, even though we don't know really what that means, and we might say those things in the beginning, because if we knew if we knew what we knew now, what we knew then, and I got that wrong, but you know where I'm going, we would have seen, well, that's no way this shit's going to turn into that, because everyone has to want to do that. Everyone has to have a certain level of consciousness to want to participate in a reality in that state. And if nobody has that, then that's not going to happen. You know, we're not going to be able to bridge that gap. That reality's not going to get there. It's just not going to happen. We can sit here all day and talk about it, but it's not going to happen. Because it's just not there yet. The people who are in the reality, they're not there yet. So that can't happen. But because we like certain parts of the reality, we like if it gave us some kind of validation, if it gave us some kind of what would have been deemed as a success, if it was a job, or it doesn't matter what it is. Because you're going to find the themes are going to run through every reality you created. You're going to have core themes in all of them. And some will be easier to align, some of them are going to be more difficult to align based on the amount of attachment you have to the reality. You know, some you'll just say, oh, whatever, let's walk away, I won't care. I think that was the biggest shock to me, is how many, as soon as I stopped participating in the reality, how fast the reality just went away. Which showed me very strongly I was the only one keeping that reality going. And the minute I said no more to that reality, I didn't even have to realign it. It didn't matter enough to the other people in it to align the reality. They didn't have the amount of investment I had in the reality. So it didn't matter. So we'll see so many of those come and go. And then we're going to see other realities where, I think I used this example earlier, and I don't think I got back to it, but you know, you're going to see, like, maybe at the end of 1 year, or you might see, okay, my job responsibilities are changing, or maybe I'm not going to be doing stuff I like as much. It's going to be easier work, and I'm not going to be able to do this anymore. It might feel like that's a demotion, right? Like, oh, I don't really have anything to do in this job. I had a job like this. Every year I got less and less and less to do. And I was home more and more and more and more, because it fits in with the next other thing you're going to be working on that year. You know, it might not be what you wanted that job to be. It might not be what you wanted that relationship to be. But the integral part of how it fits into the reality as a whole, that whole year plan you have for yourself. And like I said, it doesn't start in January and end on December. You're going to see it bleeding over, you know, from the end of the year before, and sometimes to the beginning of the next year. You know, I know last year I was still working on stuff from 2022, way into 2023. I hadn't finished it yet. But I was also constructing the other stuff I was going to be doing in 2023. So I was trying to do it all at one time, but I still knew I had things I had to finish out. I did a lot of courses that year, and I taught a lot of classes in 2022. So I had some I just had to finish. You know, it's like, I got to be done. I got to finish this stuff out. So those were kind of the things I was not as aware of as I am the last year or so, to really be able to see, okay, now I understand. If I look back at last year, I can see where it was going. And because I didn't like where it was going, I was like, oh, I'm just going to say I don't see it. I'm not really sure what I'm supposed to do. I'm going to let the whole realities just collapse down on me, because I don't really know. I'm not getting an answer when I just didn't like the answer I was getting. I didn't want to do that reality. You know, working through blood family, karmic, ancestral karma, working through your relationship and your roles with human family is one of the more difficult things we will do. Relationships in general are the most difficult thing we're going to do, because we have so much tied up in that, and we have so much that we have to unweave and untangle, and there's so much programming, so much baggage we have with these things, that eventually, one way or the other, we have to work through it. It's just not something that a lot of us are really signing up to go do. So I know this year, when I was starting to see the shift going into something else, I was like, oh, good. Maybe I've done enough of this one. I know I still got more to do here, but I've worked through enough where I can bring in something else. It's not my core focus. And a lot of us will get in next year and won't even still know what our core focus is. We'll know where we are and what we're doing, but we won't know why yet. We haven't cleared enough emotion around it to see why yet. We can't get the knowledge until we clear enough around it, to where we won't judge what we're doing. We have to be able to see it. But until you can see it, we're nowhere near done with it yet. But when we start leaving the things behind and going into the other ones, the more soul-aligned realities, there can be a big disconnect in what we thought it was going to be and what it is actually. But it doesn't mean it won't be an amazing reality. I know I didn't expect mine to be an amazing reality when I started it last year, but it has been. And the more you get into it, then you start to get into these more soul-aligned realities. And when they're soul-aligned realities, you realize, wow, this is a very simple, beautiful reality. I really am enjoying this now. And you get to the point where you have maybe, I don't know, maybe 6 months to a year. And, because normally most of especially if I'm in a certain place, usually two and a half years now is my pattern. And I got to move somewhere else. Just because of the upgrades our body goes through, we need a new environment. We might need more nature. We might need less people. It's going to change. The house might not be able to support us anymore. We have to get a bigger structure. It tends to depend. Whereas in our human life, I said in one town, a condo I had for like 10 years, because in that moment, my body wasn't progressing as much. It could support me for a while, but I know the last year I was there, I had to start really trying to renovate it, bring in new carpet, because it got so discordant to my own vibration that it wasn't supporting me anymore. So I was trying to retrofit it to work for like maybe another year. Let me get another year out of it. Knowing, I don't know if at that time I exactly knew it, but when it came to us, I knew I can't stay here anymore. It's just not supporting me the way I need to be supported. Now I got to go somewhere else, because we do start to go quicker in that sense. Though even quick for us could be 2.5 years, because we have to work through everything in the reality. We have to give our body time to upgrade. These are not overnight things. And I always say, if anyone's promising you overnight things, they just haven't experienced the depth of how long it can take. And that's if you're really that's all you do. Imagine if you have kids and you're dealing with raising children in the middle of all that, which I know a lot of people are kind of doing their journey with children. They go a little bit slower, and because they have all these other things that they have, soul contracts to finish. I mean, they agree to bring the kids in. That's another thing they're doing. So it's something else on their plate that some others of us, we didn't have to do that. We didn't bring that on too. So we could just focus on one or two things at a time. We didn't bring the other stuff in. So focusing on what's leaving, understanding why. A lot of times we don't understand the why for a while. And by the time we start to understand the why, then we start to handle the realities going a lot quicker. But when we first start, it's really seeing everything go, and it can be like a few years where you really start to see things go, and things could have stuck around for 3 or 4 or 5 years, and you go, okay, this must be aligned, but it was just aligned to a part of you. It was just aligned to one or two things in your consciousness. It might be aligned to some parts of your human consciousness, and that's why it was still there. It's still showing you something. I know I had a person that was around for a long time, and I couldn't understand why they were there. And apologies for the leaf blower. I don't know how loud that's coming through, but it sounds very loud on my end. Very, very loud. So, but the person I had around for a while, I couldn't understand. I'm like, why is that person still around? We have nothing in common. We have no consciousness connection in that sense. But they were around for different reasons. They were around because they were supposed to be around. So loud. Alright, maybe I'll just go to see if I have any questions, because I don't think I'm going to be able to finish any more than that. And maybe that's my cue. That is my cue. Okay. Yeah, if I have any questions, I will take them now, because I don't think I'm going to finish anything else I was going to say. And the frequency is shifting very quickly for me, where I'm probably not going to be able to get back to it anyway. So we'll let that go. Okay, so if I have any questions, I will take them. I see a couple highs in the chat, so it is lovely to see people today. And I'm trying to think of anything else I can bring in here. I imagine you'll be done soon, or maybe that's just my cue. But it's time to let this one go for the day. All right, I think I'm gonna cut it at that. So, all right, I'll see everybody next time.